On August 28, 2003, Brian Wells' pizza delivery in Erie, Pennsylvania, went horribly wrong when it ended with him dying thanks to a bomb locked around his neck. Wells' workday at Mamma Mia's pizzeria was proceeding normally when an order came in at 1:30 p.m. The 46-year-old delivery man was sent to bring 2 small pizzas to an address on the outskirts of town. But when Brian Wells got to the address, everything quickly changed. Rather than a house, the location to which Wells had been sent was a TV transmission tower surrounded by woods. What exactly happened there remains mysterious. But what we do know is that someone locked a bomb collar around Brian Wells' neck and ordered him to rob a PNC bank in Erie or else he would explode. So began the story of the pizza bomber robbery case, one of the strangest bank heists in history. Brian Wells was born on November 15, 1956, in Warren, Pennsylvania. He was one of 6 children and often struggled with his severe shyness in childhood. When he was 16 years old, Wells dropped out of high school to be a mechanic. Later he took up other jobs, including a pizza delivery driver for Mamma Mia's pizzeria in Erie, Pennsylvania. Wells maintained a strong relationship with his mother his whole life, even living with her at his time of death. On the other hand, Marjorie Diehl Armstrong's story was rife with conflict, long before the pizza bomber case unfolded. She was born on February 26, 1949, in Erie, Pennsylvania. Surprisingly, Diehl Armstrong was a high-performing student, and even served as her high school's valedictorian. In the early 1970s, she was a successful graduate student pursuing a degree in education when she began struggling with bipolar disorder. Her mental health continued to deteriorate with age, and soon Diehl Armstrong began exhibiting concerning violent behavior. In 1984, she shot and killed her boyfriend, Robert Thomas, while he laid on the couch. She was later acquitted for this crime after claiming self-defense. When police searched her home, they found stacks of junk and rotten food, likely a result of her bipolar-driven hoarding compulsion. She also shot and killed her boyfriend, James Roden, in 2003 after he threatened to tell the police about the pizza bombing plot. She would later stuff his body in a freezer. As expected, when Brian Wells crossed paths with Diehl Armstrong, it eventually escalated into a nightmare scenario. When Brian Wells arrived at the PNC Bank in Erie, Pennsylvania, he handed the teller a note demanding $250,000 within the next 15 minutes. However, the teller explained that she couldn't gather that big of an amount, and only gave him $8,702. Even though Wells was carrying a gun, and the person who'd locked the bomb around Wells' neck told him that he was being watched, a nervous and fearful Wells left the bank with the $8,702. Shortly afterward, the bank contacted the police, who quickly found Brian Wells standing outside his car in a nearby parking lot. That's when things took a deadly turn, and the pizza bomber incident began to hurtle toward its disturbing climax. Wells told police that people had placed the bomb around his neck, and that it would go off unless he completed a scavenger hunt. This hunt would eventually lead to keys that he could use to free himself from the device. As police called in the bomb squad and then took cover, Wells sat on a parking lot of an eyeglass shop near the bank. The collar exploded 3 minutes before the bomb squad arrived and 30 minutes after the robbery. It ripped a hole in the chest of Brian Wells, and he died on the pavement. Authorities searched Wells's car, leading them to the scavenger hunt clues. Wells had been telling the truth about that. In fact, Wells had already retrieved the first clue between the time when he left the bank and when the cops picked him up. It was a 2-page note that explained that the rest of the clues would let him live and then directed him to his next clue. When police followed the trail to the next clue in the pizza bomber case, they found that someone had already deliberately removed it. Now authorities had more reason to suspect that Brian Wells had been telling the truth and that there were other conspirators involved in this bizarre plot. Things grew more complicated 3 weeks after the botched bank robbery, when a man named Bill Rothstein called police to confess that there was a body in his freezer. Police soon found that the body belonged to James Roden, Diehl Armstrong's former boyfriend. Initially, Rothstein told police that Roden's death had nothing to do with the Brian Wells case. Instead, he said that his ex-girlfriend Marjorie Diehl Armstrong had killed Roden in a dispute over money and contacted Rothstein for help in disposing of the body. He'd initially agreed to help but now decided he couldn't go through with it. Later, Rothstein claimed that Marjorie Diehl Armstrong hatched the pizza bomber bank robbery plot because her father was squandering her multi-million-dollar inheritance and she needed money to pay a hitman to kill him before all the money was gone. Diehl Armstrong then killed Roden when he threatened to tell police about the whole thing. Police now had enough to arrest Marjorie Diehl Armstrong, But Rothstein's role in the whole affair remained unclear. Was Neil Armstrong actually the mastermind, and was he as relatively innocent as he presented himself to be? Those questions would become harder to answer after Rothstein died of lymphoma in 2004 before he could be brought to justice for his part in the Brian Wells pizza bomber case. It soon began to look like Marjorie Neil Armstrong was the actual evil genius after all. She'd already pleaded guilty to the Roden murder and received 7 to 20 years for it in 2005. But her role in the pizza bomber bank robbery was harder to suss out until another conspirator came forward. In 2005, a man named Kenneth Barnes was turned into police by a family member after speaking freely of his involvement in the Brian Wells case. Once in custody, Barnes cooperated with police and, like Rothstein, claimed that Marjorie Neil Armstrong was the mastermind behind the whole operation. Furthermore, with help from Barnes, authorities soon came to realize that Brian Wells wasn't an innocent pizza delivery guy who simply got unlucky. In fact, Barnes told authorities that Wells was in on the plot from the beginning. As Wells understood it, the bomb around his neck was supposed to be a fake, a decoy that he'd used to threaten the bank employees. With the cash, Wells planned on settling some of his debts. However, when he went to the secluded area by the TV tower, he learned that the other conspirators led by Neil Armstrong had changed their minds and put a real bomb around his neck. Brian Wells's family was shocked by the announcement. To this day, they maintain that he was an unwitting victim in a bizarre chain of events. The family says that the authorities bungled the investigation of the pizza bomber case from the beginning. They also believe the co-conspirators simply lied about Wells's involvement as a cover story. However, Barnes stuck to his story about Wells's involvement, and even though he'd cooperated with authorities, he was still sentenced to 45 years in prison after pleading guilty to bank robbing charges in 2008. 2 years later, Marjorie Neil Armstrong, the woman who everyone had called the mastermind, got her day in court in the bank robbing case. She appeared unhinged on the stand as she ranted unceasingly and ignored the judge's demands to control herself. The jury easily convicted her on the bank robbing charges and sentenced her to life in prison. Let me know, what do you think of this case and which you would like to see next? Till next time.